why I get fascinated by the butterfly is
Mhm.
the whole idea is that the caterpillar goes into the cocoon and the adult templates of the butterfly are all encoded within that caterpillar. But in the cocoon, they literally have to digest themselves of everything that is not the adult templates. So there's a
Mhm.
deep loss. So if I'm an executive, I have to let
Mhm.
go of my identity as a salesperson. When I deal with my clients, sometimes like I have to let go of my identity as a corporate leader in order to take on the identity of an entrepreneur. You had to let go of your identity as a business owner. Then you had
Yeah.
to let go of your identity as a therapist to embrace a new identity as a consulting business owner type of person. Like how do you manage that death? Like how do you help people like let go of that death?
Yeah. Yeah. And you raise a really great point because this interest all started when I left my company and became a therapist because there was a year I started grad school, right? And there was a year where I hadn't seen a client yet. So I wasn't really a therapist and I was no longer an entrepreneur. So I was in this identity liminal space, right? And it was really destabilizing for me. I didn't know who I was and I hadn't seen a client yet. And I just changed my whole life. And I didn't even know if this is really what I was going to be doing. And I remember, fortunately for me, when I saw my first client, it was a year later in the program. When I saw my first client, 15 minutes into seeing my first client, I was like, oh, this is exactly what I want to be doing. So that worked out for me. But there was that year period where I was just really um, like didn't know who I was anymore, and it was really destabilizing and uncomfortable, and that kind of thing. The thing that helped me is that I had people in my life that were walking alongside me in it. And so, and that's what I think is really, really important for us. And that's why I think coaching, like in organizations, if you're really going to have change, I think you need that. You need people that will walk alongside, not in front of you, but walk alongside
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
in this process, right? And that's what you know because of what I still train therapists, and one of the things they hear me say all the time is that I don't care what the problem is, it grows in isolation. And so we have to be in any kind of change efforts, especially when people, like you said, when somebody's making this identity change that they're making, that we have to help them not do it in isolation because it'll be harder and harder to do that, right?
Well, and it's also not just people, but the right people. Like
Yeah,
I'll give
right,
you a
right.
specific example, and I would love to see if you were my coach back at the time period.
Mm.
So I had left Disney. I was an OD consultant. Consulting was natural for me. When I started my consulting business, like, yeah, I had to learn marketing sales, but the essential role of in my identity as a consultant stayed intact. Like I
Mhm.
had and all of my professional image of like, I could stand up in front of a group of executives, blah, blah, blah. But I had this yearning on this to help people more one-on-one and move into this branding space that I'm in now, like helping people like activate their skills and their strengths and all of that. And it was such a
Mhm.
huge thing. But I had advisors at that time who kept saying, especially my accountant, is you cannot close down your consulting business. Even though I knew in my heart that was no longer, that was like an old me
Mhm.
from many years ago.
Mhm.
And until you make this other business successful. And they kept pushing me, like, you got to carry them both. And as I kept carrying them both, and I was double minded, with one foot in this world and trying to stretch into this new world, I was told over and over again, you cannot close this down. And I just had to come to a point because I was failing in both of them. I was never going to make this other one successful until I shut down that old thing. And I had to say goodbye to everything that I knew. And I had no one really around me supporting me because the people that were around me, it's like, well, if you can go work out with executives, why would you do that? If you can land six-figure gigs so easily, why would you
Mhm.
do that? So I had the advice, I had people, but all of them had a lot of vested interest in my old identity. So if
Mhm.
you were my coach, if you were my therapist, if you were the
Yeah,
person at
yeah.
that point in time, because I know there's a lot of people who are listening who are either saying, I want to leave my corporate job and I want to start my own business, or I have a business that I like, but I don't love anymore, and my heart is yearning in another direction. Counsel, I'm going to be I'm going to be everybody's virtual client at this point in time, and counsel us. What would you say to us?
Yeah. So I get asked this a lot, right? And so, because people know my background and these changes that I made in my life. And so people come to me a lot. And I even wrote this in the book is like, when they do come to me, I tell them I have one move. That's it. I have one piece of advice. And if it was you, Betsy, and you came to me and you were contemplating doing this, my one move is that you just do it. I push you off the cliff. That's what I'm going to do. So if you want to come to me about like, I'm going to make this change, should I, or whatever, I am all in. I'm going to push you off the cliff to go all in, right? And the reason is because, I would, what I hear you saying is that people are kind of projecting their own anxieties onto you, right? And like, why would you, and I heard a lot of that too. And why would you leave this like thing that has given you financial security and all this stuff to go be a therapist? Like, why, you know? And and so, and I did. I left and I took the risk, and I haven't regretted a minute. I'm glad I did it. And but also I think that this is just me. I think, mine was born out of, like you said, grief, a certain kind of grief, right? And that I came to the realization, and this is bringing Richard Rohr back into the picture maybe too, that I came to the realization that we don't know how much time we have here, right? We don't, and so I'm always really aware of that. That's always kind of here. This idea that this is impermanent. So, if you want to do something, do it. Take the leap. You know, that's my one move, and it's worked for me. And I know there's all kinds of other considerations. In context and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I get it. There's other stuff to consider, but at the end of the day, that's my one move. Go for it. Go all in. Do it.
So I think some people are like, yes, okay, I wish I would have had around you had you as a better external person give me that advice. But then they're going to be like, well, what about my internal world? Because of the voices on the outside only matter because they resonate with what you're saying to yourself on the inside. So let me throw you some of the resistance phrases that people might say. But Chris, I've always been successful and independent. I don't know if I should go into this other one where I'm not going to be successful. Why, you're asking me to give up my success. Why I'm not going to be successful in this new world like I was in this old world?
Yeah, but I mean, how do you know that, right? That is, again, going back to the known and familiar. You wouldn't even be thinking about, if everything was groovy, right? You wouldn't even be thinking about something else, right? But the thing is if I asked you enough questions, say you were coaching me and we had some time, I would be asking you enough questions about what really has kind of created this kind of urgency, or this thing inside of you that you want to do something different. And I bet we would get at all the reasons why this is no longer fulfilling, this isn't doing it for you, this kind of thing. And then we can examine how, even though it's totally not what you want to be doing, you know how to do it, but you don't know how to do that, right? And so then we can begin to have a conversation about, and this is where I like scenario planning, or like kind of trying to help people have some sort of prediction of what they might expect when they go to do this. That's how I begin to scaffold people, right? So because once you start talking about the future, it has an effect on your present. And that's how I would start doing that, like, acknowledging that even though this thing is totally unsatisfactory, you know how to do it, you know what it looks like, tastes like, feels like, and that's why it will always have a pull for you. But let's talk about the future that you want, the preferences that you want in your life, the hopes you have for your life. And then let's talk about that. And then let's talk about how scary it is. And let's talk about what experiences you might have as you begin to go into liminal space.